Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Kathy Gillespie,
with students
Dakari Chapman
and me, Tova Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Constitutional Chats, sponsored by Constituting America. My name is Janine Turner, and I am the founder and co-president of Constituting America. So on behalf of our entire fabulous panel, I welcome you to the show, and come on in and have a seat. And as you grab your chair, which I always like to say, Aubrey is going to put up a little poll just so we know with whom we are speaking. If we're speaking to 8th graders or middle school, high school, college, grandparents, parents, teachers. So just scroll up and down and click that. And while we do that, I'm going to talk about the fabulous, wonderful Aubrey Jackman. She is our media director, and she's responsible for all the fabulous technology. And we just think so highly of her. And Aubrey is this year's Constituting America's We the Future Best College STEM winner. By the way, we have a fabulous workshop coming up, 6 hours of workshops with students and Kathy and I. And that is this Friday we're going to read the Constitution live. And it's this Friday from 10:15, 10:30 Eastern, all the way to 3:30. So join us. Okay, Aubrey is also living in Utah, and she's the middle of 7 children. And she's a student at Brigham Young University and aspires to be an athletic coach. And what I always say is, with a smile like Aubrey's and an intellect like Aubrey's, I fully expect to see her at the Olympics someday, coaching a fantastic team and winning. So Aubrey, say hello and tell us about our audience today.
You are always so kind, Janine. Thank you. So to share who is in our audience today, there are 33% parent and grandparents with children. That's awesome. Such a large amount today. And then we have, looks like 21% fans, 17% friends, and then another 17% donors and 13% teachers. So we're happy you're all here with us.
Yay. All right, we are too. I am too. We're very happy that you're with us today. Okay, I'm going to introduce the panel and then our special guest. And I'm going to tell you today we're talking about, are the Bill of Rights really necessary? And of course, we all know they are. But we're going to talk about what the federal farmer and James Wilson's State House speech and the Federalist 84 thought about it all. The pros and cons and differing opinions. And this is going to be our study for today. I've really loved this Federalist paper study, and I mean the Anti-Federalist paper study as well. All righty, is the Bill of Rights necessary? This is what we're going to find out today. First, I'm going to introduce our fabulous panel. Kathy Gillespie is co-president of Constituting America. And without Kathy, we wouldn't even be here, because an eagle takes a left wing and a right wing to fly and 2 wings to flap. And if I did not have the great sort of prescient moment to call Kathy to launch this foundation, I would just be flapping around on the ground trying to fly. So Kathy Gillespie was the chief of staff on the Hill for congressman for decades. She's also one of the few select 16 people, private citizens, who are serving on the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission, helping to organize our country's celebration of the 250th birthday in 2026. Very prestigious. She was also a former chief of staff on the Hill, and well, we already talked about that, but former commissioner on the President's Commission of White House Fellows. Kathy, hello, and talk to us about our sponsor today.
Well, thank you, Janine. And it's my honor to get to work with you every day. We have so much fun together, and it's your vision and energy and hard work that really keeps it going. So thank you for all you do. I want to thank our sponsor today, Blair Hudson of Dallas, Texas. And Blair is not only our sponsor for today's episode of Constitutional Chats, she's also a sponsor for the program that Janine was talking about this Friday, September 17th, our live Constitution Day workshops. So I know Blair would want to give one more plug to this Friday and invite especially all the teachers watching to invite your classrooms to be part of these great workshops that we have going all day featuring our We the Future contest winners. And Blair, thank you for being such a great supporter and friend of Constituting America for many years and all the relationships that you help us nurture and foster in the Dallas area. So we're real excited to have you as our sponsor today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very, 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 very much. And now I'm going to introduce the fabulous Tova Kaplan. We've known her for 4 years and we just watched her grow up and she's so incredibly exceptional. Tova is 17 years old, but we've known her, I think, since she was 12 or 13. She's a student in Chicago, Illinois. She's a 3-time winner of our We the Future contest. Best marketing plan, best PSA, and best STEM, our app, which is going to be launched very soon. But she's just extraordinary. She's also the National Youth Director of Constituting America and runs the Youth Advisory Board. And I always like to say, like a top CEO of a top 100 company. And she's passionate about inspiring young people to know and use their constitutional rights. She also speaks 4 languages, I believe, and someday we're going to see her as Secretary of State, President of the United States, or Ambassador to the UN, whatever she wants to accomplish. Tova will do it. I have no doubt. Tova Kaplan, say hello.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. I'm at school, finally in person. So it's great to be able to take an hour out of my day to go learn about the Constitution. It's always just, you would think after over 100 episodes, we'd run out of things to talk about, but we really don't. It's always so, amazing and interesting each time. So thank you for being with us.
And Tova, you've been with us since day one with all the 100 episodes or so we've done. So you're terrific and doing it from school. What a trooper you always are. All right, Kathy, would you like to introduce our special guest today, Jacob Vanderwerken?
Yes, I am very happy to introduce Jacob Vanderwerken, who is our strategic director, and he is on with us today as a special guest. And Jacob helps our organization in so many different ways with our social media and just our marketing and all of our outreach. And so, Jacob, thank you so much. Jacob is also a graduate, very recent graduate of Brigham Young University, and is a former contest winner with Constituting America. So, Jacob, we're so glad to have you with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a privilege to be on. Appreciate it.
Yes, his short film was all sign language. It's very impressive, wonderful film. All at Constituting America archive. You can find it. All right, drum roll, please. I'm going to introduce Tara Ross, our guest. All righty, Tara Ross is nationally recognized for her expertise on the Electoral College and America's founding. She's the author of 4 books on the Electoral College, including Why We Need the Electoral College, which we do. She is the author of She Fought Too, Stories of Revolutionary War Heroines, and co-author of Under God, George Washington and the Question of Church and State. Her Prager University videos, Do You Understand the Electoral College, is Prager's most viewed video ever. Get this, are you ready? Oh my gosh. With more than 60 million views. Her daily post on America history via Facebook, where she has over 243,000 followers, receive tens of thousands of impressions every day. Tara often appears as a guest on a variety of talk shows nationwide, and she regularly addresses civic, university, and legal audiences. She's contributed to many law reviews in newspapers, including the National Law Journal, USA Today, the Washington Examiner, The Hill, the Washington Times, and FoxNews.com. She addresses audiences at institutions such as the Cooper Union, Brown University, the Dole Institute of Politics, and Mount Vernon. She's appeared on Fox News, C-SPAN, NPR, and a variety of other national and local shows. Tara is a retired lawyer and a former editor-in-chief of the Texas Review of Law and Politics. She obtained her BA from Rice University, so did my daughter, and her JD from the University of Texas School of Law, one of the top in the nation. She resides in Dallas with her husband and children. All right, Tara Ross, we're thrilled that you're with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Okie dokie. Well, we're going to let you set the stage, so to speak, and talk about this wonderful anti-federalist and federalist debate. And then we will all have our moment to ask you questions, as well as will the audience. So type your questions in if you would like to ask Ms. Ross something at the end of this.
So great. Well, thanks for having me again. I appreciate it. I'm going to be brief because I know this is mostly about the questions that are going to be coming in from the audience and so forth. But I thought the best way to start was really just to talk about, to make sure we're all on the same page about what the Anti-Federalists are and what the Federalists are. I know you guys have done a few of these sessions, so hopefully this isn't all new information, but just to start off, in the months after the Constitution was proposed by the delegates to the Constitutional Convention, there were a series of debates that went back and forth in the newspapers. Our founding generation was very well read and very involved in this debate about the Constitution and its pros and cons and whether we should indeed ratify it. Now, the people that were for the Constitution were called the Federalists. And of course, you've heard of the Federalist Papers. They were written by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and John Jay. They were very organized and presented very well. Alexander Hamilton did that on purpose. He was trying to at first convince New York, but then it ended up being published all over the then 13 colonies. So they were organized. They went through things step by step, and that was helpful for the pro-Constitution cause. Now, the Anti-Federalists were not that organized. They were writing, sometimes they had their own internal system for writing papers, or sometimes, but it was just much more ad hoc. They were in papers all over the country, and it just was not the same kind of formal, organized presentation that the Federalists were making. But these Anti-Federalists included people like, writing under pseudonyms, by the way, the Federal Farmer, Brutus, Cato, John DeWitt. There were many of these men. We think they were all men. Now that I think about it, I guess there could have been a woman in the mix, but they were writing under pseudonyms, and this was being published in newspapers. And again, this was a very lively debate between the two sides about what to do about our Constitution. Now, when it came to the Bill of Rights, the Anti-Federalists were very, very concerned. The Constitution, as it had been proposed, of course, did not include a Bill of Rights at all. The delegates to the Constitutional Convention had decided against that. Now, the Anti-Federalists knew and understood, of course, that if you're going to create a new government and you're going to create a new society, then the individuals will end up giving up some of their rights to this new government. But they thought, look, we all agree, you don't give up every right. There are some rights that cannot be given away. There are some rights that aren't necessary to give away. And so the purpose of a Bill of Rights is to define which rights are going to be retained by the people and how that's going to work. The people should always have something to fall back on, to point to and say, no, I didn't give that up. That's how the Anti-Federalists are thinking about this. They also looked at the fact that state constitutions at the time included bills of rights. So they wanted to know, well, why do those have bills of rights, and why not the federal Constitution? And they were very, very concerned because of the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution. And they knew that any law that was enacted by Congress, acting under its constitutional authority, that would be the supreme law of the land. And they looked at other clauses like the Necessary and Proper Clause, that Congress can pass laws that are necessary and proper to put into effect the powers that's been delegated to it. And they thought, well, this is going to go really badly awry. We have this huge sweeping power potentially, and it will be the supreme law of the land. What good does the state constitution's bills of rights have if they're just going to be, overshadowed and overthrown by what's happening with the federal Constitution? So they were very, very worried. And that was their argument. They said, we need the Bill of Rights before we even think about adopting this Constitution. We need changes. We need a Bill of Rights attached to it. Now, the Federalists, on the other hand, they looked at the situation and they said, look, you've completely misunderstood this. The federal constitution is not like the state constitutions. It's a constitution in which we have created a Congress, but it's a Congress with limited powers. It doesn't have every power except for what we specifically take away from it. It has only the powers that we gave to it in the first place. So if you add a list, you're just going to confuse things. And people are going to stop saying to themselves, well, I need to go look for permission to act in that document. And instead, they're going to start looking for a prohibition. And that's a really big difference if you're looking for permission versus I can't do that. So they were very, very worried that adding a list of a Bill of Rights to the Constitution would actually end up harming individual liberty and would actually make things worse. And they looked to things like the separation of powers as an additional security for the people's rights. And they said, look, this is a constitution with Congress that's got limited power. It's got checks and balances, separation of powers, and we need to rely on that. And so that's where things stood when the Constitution was ratified. Now, of course, the Anti-Federalists ended up winning the day on this, and they ended up getting the Bill of Rights that they wanted. And the Bill of Rights was adopted in 1791, about 2.5 years after the first Congress met for the first time. So that's my summary presentation, so as not to go too long, and I look forward to the questions.
Talk to us about James Wilson's State House speech.
Sure. Well, so this was a speech that he gave. It was not even a month after the Constitutional Convention had broken up. And James Wilson gave the speech on the steps of the State House. And it came to be something that was very powerful in favor of the Constitution. Not a planned part of the Federalist Papers that I mentioned before, but just something more impromptu that he did. And one of the main points when it comes to the Bill of Rights that he made in that speech is he said, look, this is a government of limited powers. And, if you put the list and if you add it to the Constitution, I'm trying to think now what the specific example, I think it might've been the press, but he said, look, if you say the press can't do X, Y, and Z, but you never gave the press any power over that to begin with, then people are going to start to say, well, that's no good. Or they're going to flip their thinking on it, like I talked about before. And they're going to say, we can do anything we want to the press as long as it's not specifically prohibited in the Bill of Rights that's been attached. And so James Wilson again said, look, you're looking at this the wrong way. This is a limited constitution, a limited federal government. It's not like the state governments. He pointed out a contrast there. The state governments, you give much more power to them. We do give state governments police power, and there is much more an expectation of the people need to reserve their rights if they want to keep them, because the state government is closer to home and it is going to have more of those kinds of local powers. So he drew the contrast between state and federal government, and he talked about the federal government and the limited power that it has.
I find it interesting, this debate about the Bill of Rights, and I kind of compare it to the dialogue we're having today, whereas some concepts in our political divide are able to really hit home emotionally to people, and other concepts are more are a little more, take a little more cerebral thinking, and so it can't have that kind of Twitter feed, the social media hit, because you can't really say it in 5 words. If you can say something emotionally in the political world in 5 words, you're going to start a movement, because that's all anybody reads anymore is 5 words. And it's just a little quick glance at what's going on in the world. It's interesting. My daughter and her generation, they don't even watch the news, and they don't read newspapers. So they don't even have cable. They're not even really, they're just getting limited news flashes. And that's really what's happening. And my daughter's an intellectual, right? But I think that it's very dangerous. So there's this sort of 5-word emotional sort of grab that people can do compared to, well, look, there's much more to this debate cerebrally and intellectually, and we need to understand what's really behind it. And to me, that's what was happening with the Bill of Rights. To have a Bill of Rights was a knee-jerk reaction. It was just emotional. Look, the Magna Carta, we have to have these things. and to be able to understand that the Bill of Rights weren't really necessary, that took a lot of thinking, right?
Right. And it's interesting because I'm not even sure some of the founders, they didn't stand strong on it. Maybe the emotion got to them. I don't know. But James Madison was one of the ones who started off saying, no, we don't need this, don't need this. By the end, he was in the first Congress helping to shepherd the thing through, right? And, I think he was definitely cognizant of some of the dangers, but he just thought that he would, I guess, write them carefully or something, and it would be okay. But, definitely, I think especially as modern Americans, our mindsets have changed so much. Unless we make a conscious effort, as I appreciate that y'all do for the generation that's coming up, but unless you make a conscious effort to pay attention and to learn and to focus, most Americans have gotten so used to just thinking, the Congress will take care of it, it's fine, and our thinking has shifted so much away from states and state action and thinking that we need a national solution and we need some of these things. And the Bill of Rights, well, that's a no-brainer, of course, because Congress has so much power, you've got to have some kind of protection against that, when it was never that way at all, right? In the founding generation, they thought the state governments were so powerful. Like, those are the powerful entities. Congress is limited and it can't really do much. We've given it some specific responsibilities and it can do that, but it can't really do that much more. So why would you need a Bill of Rights? You don't need a Bill of Rights to protect yourself from that weak thing in Washington, D.C. It wasn't even Washington, D.C. then. It was the national government that was yet to find a home, right? So the thinking has shifted so drastically, and I don't think all for the better. But the more that again, thank you for hosting these, the more that we spend time focusing on it and trying to remember where we came from, maybe we can shift some of it back to a more healthy place.
Yeah. I'm just really worried about how the rising generations are getting their news. It's become so divided and so political. Okay, so last question, I want to toss it to Tova. In your opinion, because you're so astute and you said this is really your specificity, how do you feel, who was right? And today, if we look at the government today, who was right on this Bill of Rights situation, in your opinion?
That's an interesting question. My gut says that the Federalists were right the whole time and that we undermined ourselves by adding the Bill of Rights. That's an unpopular position probably, but also the other problem in this whole big mess is the lack of education, because the fact that so many people don't understand how their government works. We've watched 18 months now of governors and presidents acting like they have some sort of executive pen that can just order us around, and they don't. We don't understand separation of powers. We think we have kings apparently sitting in the White House and in governor's mansions, or queens in some cases, and we don't understand separation of powers. We don't understand checks and balances. We don't understand as a country some of the limits that are in Congress and what Congress should be doing versus what state governments should be doing. We don't understand that California and Texas and Missouri can all have different solutions to the same problem, and that's part of the beauty of the thing, right? And so, whatever you think of some of the issues of the day going on, to think that, I don't know, Hollywood can just get out of a state now because they didn't like their policy solution to something, it misses the whole point. The whole point is that every single one of our 50 states is going to come up with a different solution to these problems. And that's how it was supposed to be. But nobody understands any of this anymore. And so, when I say that we'd be better off without the Bill of Rights, I probably am assuming an educated populace and that we kept that up. So we didn't. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I can understand the Federalist point of view of why we didn't need it, because in a way you're limiting yourself by having it. But on the flip side, I think it's good that we have them because the government is just so
out of control.
Big, man. Yeah, it's really good that we have them. So it's not an easy debate. All right, Tova Kaplan, I would love to hear your questions.
Great, thank you. This is so fascinating. And I can definitely see you know so much about it. So that's great. So I was wondering, the Bill of Rights wasn't passed too far after the Constitution was written, right? So it was the same group of people with the same ideas. So why why weren't they able to include the Bill of Rights in the original Constitution? Why did they have to, update it?
Well, I think the answer largely is that people like James Madison did not think it was needed at all. And honestly, left to their own devices, they probably would have just left things that way. I don't think they really wanted it, but there was so much emotion and so much furor from September 1787 until when the first Congress met in the spring of 1789, that there was so much upset and furor and emotion about it that I think they just kind of some of them got pressured, some of them maybe changed their minds a little bit and thought that maybe they could have their cake and eat it too, carefully craft the Bill of Rights and make it better. But it really mostly just has to do, I think, with the emotion and the politics of the moment and the difficulty of standing firm on a decision that had been made. It's much easier to stand firm on a decision made in a quiet room in Philadelphia, right? When nobody else is debating it in the news or in the newspapers and so forth. So they got pushed that way.
Fair enough. They did what they had to. And so I was wondering, what was the process to determine the 10 rights that would ultimately be in the Bill of Rights? Because, there are some rights that are obvious, like, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. There were others that were not included that, later had to be amended to the Constitution. So what was the process for deciding that? Who decided that?
So that's a good question. So it went through Congress the whole summer of 1789. And as I mentioned earlier, James Madison was really the one that shepherded a lot of that when it was on the House anyway. He was a member of the House of Representatives at the time. And so it was like any other piece of legislation in many ways. They had a first draft and then they changed it and they talked about it and they changed it. And finally, eventually the House approved something. And then I believe the House approved it first and the Senate approved it second. I probably should confirm myself on that because I haven't thought about it in a while, but it was just like any other piece of legislation, going through all of the pieces, all the processes, all the hearings, all the debates. But then in September, actually, tomorrow's the anniversary, on September 15th, 1789, they passed it out of Congress and it went to the states. Now, at the time, they had 12 amendments that they had proposed to the states. And of those, of course, we know only 10 of them were accepted, at least at that time. There was one of those was accepted literally centuries later because it got dusted off and brought back out. But it was so they proposed 12. The first two got rejected, were not accepted by enough states. And then the 10 that were after that were the ones that were finally ratified by the states. So the amendment that Congress thought would be the third amendment became our first amendment.
Great. Were there any rights that, a segment of the population felt very strongly about including in the Bill of Rights that didn't end up being included, or was it not as contentious?
I think most of the main ones got in. Some of the things that you'll hear people or read that they wrote about, the right to bear arms felt very, very, very strongly about that. But of course, the whole American Revolution started because the British were coming for our arms and ammunition at Lexington and Concord, as you may remember. So, I mean, they felt very, very strongly about the right to bear arms, not so they could go hunting, but because they thought it was important to have an armed populace if you wanted to prevent the government from, going too far out of its bounds. So as a tangent here, I might note, Australia might be showing us right now what happens when you have an unarmed populace. If you pay attention to what's going on over there right now, they're having trouble with some of the lockdowns and some of the government enforcement that's happening over there. The founders, of course, were living in a different context and a different time, but it was the same principle. And they knew that you need to have an armed populace if you're going to be able to push back some government tyranny. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, these were other things that were really important to them. Of course, freedom of press was something that was hard fought during the revolution. It could be hard to get information out and it could be very difficult. The post office started in large part because they didn't want to rely on the British post office, because they knew that if they did that some of their information would be censored, effectively thrown away, and wouldn't make it out there. So a post office that could deliver you news or could deliver you information, these were things that were, from a practical standpoint, have been very, very important during their fight for liberty against the British. And so it was certainly going to be included in the Bill of Rights.
Great. And then finally, my last question is, when the Bill of Rights was passed, was this a kind of novel invention? Had it been done before? Were there any other countries or political systems at the time that had something like the Bill of Rights, guaranteeing certain freedoms to people?
I think the first thing that the founders would have looked at would have been the state constitutions that did have bills of rights attached to them. And many of them were similar to what we ultimately passed in the federal government as well.
Okay. It's interesting. I know that one of the two that made it 12 instead of 10 is now the 27th Amendment, and it's about congressional pay, that Congress shouldn't to raise their pay and then receive that pay in the same congressional session. And if you really think about it, that really didn't have anything to do with rights. So I can see, it's interesting to me that that was even tacked, kind of added on to the Bill of Rights, because it really didn't have anything to do with that. I wonder what you thought about that. But also, and Tova, if you want to have another question, and Aubrey and Jacob, either of you have a question, I'll come to you next. But what was the other one? Do you know? The 12th? That would make 11.
The other, it's interesting you say that, because I hadn't thought about it that way before, but you're right. I mean, the two that got rejected didn't have much to do with individual liberty. They had to do with other things. The second one that was proposed was the one that you mentioned about congressional pay, which did get adopted as the 27th Amendment many years later. The first one had to do with just the proportion of people that could be, like, how do you decide how many congressmen you have, and what proportion of people? There was some formula in there, not more than, not less than. I don't remember it specifically.
Well, that didn't have anything to do with rights either then. So
no, it had to do with how many representatives are we going to have? Does each representative represent X number of people? It was like they can't represent less than, I think it was like 50,000 people or something like that. It was math. That's why I can't remember it.
Yeah, that would have been that would have been an Article 1, Section 8, or an Article 1 for sure. That type of thing. Interesting.
Right.
Did Madison think that up, or was he sort of taking everybody's ideas and saying, okay, I need to think? In other words, was it sort of a mail-in, the one that you want is a Bill of Rights, and he's shuffled through all of them? It didn't seem like Madison would have put that there.
It was a little bit of both. I don't know where that particular idea came from. I just don't remember. But as when it came to the list, it was a little bit of both Madison's proposals and then people pushing back on it.
Interesting. Or maybe Madison was just trying to kind of get a few extra things in that he wished had been in Article 1. It's like, oh wait, maybe I can get this passed.
Another try.
Yeah. It's like, let me see if I can get this to work. All right, I'm going to open the floor to Aubrey or Jacob, whoever would like to ask a couple of questions, and then I'll toss it to Kathy.
Yeah, I've got a question. So Tara, the Federalists didn't think that we needed a Bill of Rights. What do you think that they think of the amendments that we've made after the Bill of Rights?
That's an interesting question. I hate putting words in people's mouths a lot, but I think they would have been glad about some of the ones that followed the Civil War. I say that because James Madison, he was one of the big benefits to the Constitution, he thought, is that eventually it would bring an end to slavery. Now that's the opposite of what you hear from the people tearing down statues and stuff. But actually, James Madison, what he said about it was the Articles of Confederation do not provide any route for us to ever bring this to an end. Now, the Constitution, of course, delayed that start, right? Not until the year 1800. I forget what exact year, but in the beginning of the 1800s, you couldn't address this in Congress at all. But after that, you could. And so James Madison said, look, we're doing this right now to bring the Union together, North and South, and just to punch some of these issues and kick the can down the road. But eventually, with the Constitution, you can end slavery. And he thought it was a great benefit. So I don't really know, but I think he'd probably be happy about some of those amendments and feel like that, he was wishing for that sort of stuff. And so now when it comes to the income tax and stuff, I don't know. I mean, maybe the thing to say is that they knew that they hadn't created something perfect. They And so that's why, I mean, they spent a lot of time discussing how amendments were to be made, because they definitely knew that amendments would be needed. But they wanted to make it easy enough so that it could be done when it was necessary, but hard enough that there just wouldn't be a bunch of random amendments. So I suspect that they would be really happy that we have 27 amendments. I think they would probably consider that a good number. Like, we recognized things that were going wrong and fixed it through a formal process that required supermajority approval. But also, you're not looking at 2,700 amendments, which I think they would think was just crazy, and that meant they had failed completely, So, but I have no idea what any of them would think
And
about.
that it wasn't, and that the Constitution wasn't tossed for a new Constitution. Right. That they did. I think they'd be really happy about that as well.
I mean, I think they'd be happy with a lot of what's happened. What's happening right now, maybe not so much, but it stood the test of time, and I think they would be really proud of it. Is probably the one thing we can know.
Jacob, do you have another question, or Tova or Aubrey?
I was just going to say thank you, because that's really interesting to think just how they they weren't necessarily anti-change. They wanted change, but it's really fascinating how you described just that they would, in your opinion at least, that they probably would be in favor of some of those policy changes. And also it's intriguing to think, because I think I've always thought of 27 as a lot, but when you put it in perspective of like 2,700, it really isn't that many changes. Mm-hmm. That's really fascinating.
No, I mean, our Constitution is remarkably short and remarkably few amendments, which I think is a huge endorsement of what was accomplished that summer in 1787. I live in Texas. Our Constitution's crazy long. There's always stuff on the ballot. It's unusual. It's unusual to have a Constitution that accomplishes so much in so few words.
I had a question. Do you think that if there hadn't been this Bill of Rights, do you think the Federalists would have been right, that our rights would have been protected? Or do you feel like eventually, you seem to be very worried about like national government overreach, or just government overreach in general. So do you feel if we hadn't had the Bill of Rights spelled out, eventually the government would have overridden our rights and not respected them?
I think it would have been okay for a while. And I think that if we had paid more attention to education, it would have been okay for even longer than that. But put the two together, I guess, and, I'm probably pretty happy at this point in time. Actually, for the more we're talking about it, I'm probably pretty happy that we have rights that we can point to and say, no, look, it's right there on paper. Like, you don't get to do that. And I probably am happy, but there's a part of me in the back of all that that's sad, because I realize that the reasons I'm happy about it have more to do with people just not understanding what they were given. Calvin Coolidge said something to the effect of, living under the United States Constitution is the greatest blessing that any human being could ever have. And I'm paraphrasing him. He said it better. But, I think that unfortunately too many Americans today, we replaced civics with social studies, and we don't teach some of this stuff in the classroom anymore. You guys know I wrote a book about the Electoral College. It's very rare to find it. I mean, there are some teachers who do it, and I'm grateful for them, but there are a lot more teachers that don't know how to teach it, don't even understand it themselves. And that's true of too many constitutional institutions, including separation of powers, checks and balances, what an executive order can and cannot do, and that sort of thing. Can Congress delegate just anything it wants to the president? Can a state legislature delegate anything it wants to a governor? Like, these are things that nobody thinks about anymore, but this was all part of understanding our system. So yeah, the short answer is yeah, I'm probably happy I can point to an amendment here or there and say, nope, that's I'm relying on that one right now. But underneath it, I'm just sad. I'm sad that we got to a point where we couldn't just rely on the structure of the Constitution, because I do think it was enough, properly understood.
Well, and piecing together what this discussion today, what I've garnered from listening to you, is just that if the state's governments Tova, this goes to your question. If the state governments had maintained their power and their central focus, and the Bill of Rights were protected in the state government, as long as that was happening, we would have been safe. But the minute the state started to diminish in power, that's when the government got bigger, and that's when we weren't safe anymore. We weren't protected. And I think the 17th Amendment probably had a lot to do with that.
That's what I was just about to say. We can trace all that back to the 17th Amendment. And people, this goes back to not understanding what we were given and why. And people think, well, of course I want to vote for my United States senator. What do you mean? You're going to take away my right to vote for my senator? Well, if you understand the role of the Senate, what it was supposed to do, it was never supposed to be a representative for the people. Like, we have our representatives in the House of Representatives. That is the function of the House of Representatives. The function of the United States Senate was to be to represent the states themselves. So, when the states were represented in Congress, they could protect themselves against the federal government run amok, just taking over their stuff and saying, well, I'm going to do that now. They could protect themselves against things like unfunded state mandates. There was no United States senator elected by a state legislature that wanted to go home and explain to the state legislature, yeah, now you got to go fund that education, whatever now, right? Like, they knew they would not get elected again. And so they wanted to make the state legislatures happy. And so that it was all a very fine balance. And we just destroyed it one day with the 17th Amendment. And so now, of course, the states have absolutely no representation in Washington, D.C., literally zero. And so, of course, they're having trouble defending themselves against the federal government sometimes.
And that would have been the turning point when we needed our Bill of Rights. The minute that 17th Amendment was passed, Tova, is what I and Jacob, to answer to build on your question, I think the founding fathers probably, one amendment they wouldn't like out of all of them would be the 17th Amendment, because that's the only amendment, to my knowledge, really, that has changed the entire structure of the Constitution. And I think that would be the one they'd be like, whoa, no, danger. Okay, Kathy, go ahead.
And I agree 100%. And, speaking of the states, in looking at the 9th and 10th Amendments in the Bill of Rights, I thought it was interesting. And I was wondering if they were almost a compromise that were designed by the Federalists that were worried about the enumeration of rights, because, the 9th says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And then the 10th says power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states or reserved to the states. So it's sort of like two blanket amendments saying, hey, just because we listed all these rights, any rights that we don't list, basically the people or the states get. What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely agree with that. I think of the amendments that those two are the more Federalist leaning ones, and definitely kind of saying, hey, this is not a complete list. Just so don't go there. I agree with that completely.
And we have a few questions here from the audience, and let's see. Mary Multimere wants to know, have you read Caroline Kennedy's book, Read the Bill of Rights?
I haven't. Do I need to? I guess she can't.
I don't know.
I will look into it. I have not read it. I'm sorry.
And then Susan Baker says, thank you, Tara Ross and Constituting America team. This is an excellent presentation. Will it be shareable later? Which it will be, Susan. If you go on our website, constitutingamerica.org, and scroll down under our constitutional chats, there's a button that says Constitution Archives, Constitutional Chats Archives, and click on that and it will be there. But Susan also goes on to say, big point seems to be the loss of education of the blessings of the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and the Federalist Letters. We have to take our education back and let the population know what an amazing gem we live with. Takes personal responsibility. Thank you again.
Look, I have said, and I hoped that a silver lining of these past 18 crazy months is that so many parents have had, including me, I've got 2 kids, have had an opportunity to look at what the schools are doing and what's happening, and to listen, in many cases, to listen directly to what's going on. I think a lot of parents are really, you think you know what's going on in a classroom, and it turns out you don't always. And lots of parents are expressing that all around the country. And so I really hope, of course, we see a surge towards private schools, a surge towards homeschooling, a surge towards just kind of taking control again of your own kids' education. And I mean, I hope that that will really bear fruit in the coming years. I think it's a definite possibility, and that would be a huge blessing if it happened.
And then finally, Beverly Roberts asks a question that really kind of goes back to the checks and balances and the importance of the checks and balances protecting our liberty, because Beverly asks, how can we reduce the stranglehold the bureaucrats have on our society? As unelected federal employees, they have way too much control over our lives. How do you, Tara, how do you see that interplays between checks and balances? And also, is there any relationship to the Bill of Rights with that question?
Well, I mean, I guess there's several ways to address that question. One is, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but Congress can't just delegate away anything it wants to, right? Too often, I think Congress or state legislatures delegate things to some bureaucracy because they don't want accountability for it. And so they just kind of make the headline decision, and then they let the bureaucracy decide all the details that are going to really upset people, right? And so I do think, I maybe through lawsuits or other things, maybe some of those boundaries can be pushed to see, like, well, was that really a proper delegation of authority there? Because I don't think we should ever take that as a given. I think that when we elect people, we should push our elected officials to question those boundaries, to take back delegation, maybe even to shut down some agencies or make them much smaller. I think these are things that each state, again, can make their own decisions. But like, I think these are questions that need to be asked and things that we need to talk about. I think we should not just assume that our incumbent is going to answer these questions like we would want them to. And I think we should talk about it. And I mean, I think we the people, we've got an election coming up next year, and I think we need to put some serious thought to what we're going to do in our local elections in particular. And the other thing I would just say is, I noticed that during these past 18 months, even if somebody, say, for instance, did not feel that their local executive could lock them down, tell them not to go to work or whatever, it was really difficult to push back. And the reason that it was difficult to push back was because of the bureaucracies, right? And it's because they're afraid of losing a license. They're afraid of just whatever, like all of the paperwork that you need to stay open, to be a hairdresser or to have a bar or to, any of the things that we have. I mean, it was just so hard. And I know it was so hard for people. And it came to the point where you really couldn't push back on some of this stuff unless you could get basically everybody in the city to do it, which is also hard. And I do know that there were some places where restaurants, for instance, ganged up and all said at once, we're not going to do X, Y, and Z. And it did have an effect. But that kind of organizational effort is very, very difficult. And the bureaucracies is what caused a lot of that. So I am coming off really small government here, but the founders were pretty small government. so I feel like I'm in good company. I hope that we push back on some of this, and I hope that we start to undo some of the mess that we've made by delegating so much power to unaccountable, unelected officials.
Very true. Now, John Peeler, one of our listeners, asked an interesting question. He says, as one example, would we have a right to bear arms now if we did not have a Bill of Rights in our Constitution? Even with this important right spelled out, it is in jeopardy of being taken from us. How would a Constitution without a Bill of Rights have protected this?
Well, I think it's the same thing I said before. I agree that we are in this place right now where so much is misunderstood. And I mean, we're so many decades past, a healthy spot for some of this stuff. So I'm also pretty happy that the Second Amendment is in there. Like I said, I'm sad that we got to this point where we're so uneducated that we needed it, I guess, but as a people. But look, I'm happy it's in there personally.
And then I had a question, just generally. It seems that the Federalist Papers are so much more well-known than the Anti-Federalist Papers. I know even me as a political science major, I had never read an Anti-Federalist paper until I got involved with Constituting America and really on this study. I mean, I don't think I had read an Anti-Federalist paper until we started this study of them. During the time that they were being published, Did the Anti-Federalist papers get equal billing with the Federalist papers? I mean, were they published in, do you know, in as many newspapers as the Federalist papers, or did newspapers try to publish both, or how exactly, do you know how that worked?
It was just more haphazard. I mean, some of them did get published in multiple places. A lot of them just aren't as well known. And so I actually don't know, but I'm assuming they didn't get published as widely as some of the others. I mean, I would say there's a handful of Anti-Federalists that did get more billing than some of the others, Brutus, Cato, Federal Farmer, there are a handful of those. And I definitely encourage reading them because there's a lot of wisdom in them too. You know, I mean, look, I'm happy the Constitution was ratified. I think it was the right thing to do, but there were warnings in there that were well spoken and well reasoned, and we can learn a lot from them because some of it unfortunately has come to be. I think the Federalist always kind of made the assumption that education would always be at the forefront of our society, and they said over and over again, you know, free educated people aren't going to let these things happen. They're going to rise up against the government that tries to do it, and they gave all the structural reasons why that people could protect themselves. But when we lost education, we lost everything.
Well, we agree with you on that for sure. Janine, do you want to take it?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about Tara, you keep referencing the 18 months, and I believe you're referencing the COVID crisis. And you know, it's interesting to me that watching the COVID crisis play out, for lack of a better word, it has been interesting to see how the states have held their ground, and in different states they do different things. I think that's the one sort of positive example we have today of where states actually are able to take a stand against the federal government. Of course, it's in regard to health, which is well, anyway, I guess you can debate that on many issues and from many angles, but I think we are seeing different states handle it in different ways. I mean, I guess we got a little bit of state power still.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting and relevant to this discussion, which is why I keep alluding to it, I guess, because so many governors and both presidents have, you know, they've acted like a pandemic as a reason to tread on your natural rights. A pandemic is not a reason to tread on your natural rights. And the Constitution still exists, even in the middle of a pandemic, even if, you know, that is not to make light of COVID. I'm not trying to make light of it. Clearly, it can very seriously, I mean, the issue thing about COVID is for some people, it's like a sniffle, right? For other people, it wreaks havoc with their health. And so I'm not trying to make light of COVID, but underneath it all, we are still a free people. We are still free Americans. We still have different priorities. We still have, you know, one family might really need to buckle down and protect themselves from COVID because of health considerations in their family. And for another family, it really might be much more important for their kids to have completely normal school, you know, so that their kids avoid, you know, name all the problems kids are going through right now, right? And so, or to keep your business, because I would rather, maybe somebody says, I would rather risk COVID than have my business shut down. I don't want my business shut down. That's my livelihood. I'd rather be sick for 2 weeks, sick as a dog for 2 weeks and free the rest of the 18 months because I need to earn money and I need to take care of my family. Everybody's got different considerations. Everybody's got different things going on. We are free Americans. We get to do that. And the fact that has been violated routinely for 18 months, and it's been violated routinely because we can't seem to remember that we have separation of powers, checks and balances, that, you know, there's no such thing as a mask mandate, for instance, unless you have state legislative, not federal, state legislative hearings on the pros and cons of that, because there are both pros and cons. And so, you know, this is the level of discussion and debate that a free people should go through before they start to tread on people's liberty and their natural rights. And so, you know, I guess this, you know, people keep saying, do we need the Bill of Rights? I mean, I guess we're seeing that we do need something because nobody remembers how the Constitution works anymore. And nobody remembers that you actually get to make a lot of these decisions for yourself, even if there's a pandemic going on. The pandemic didn't change that at all. So no other pandemic did. And, you know, anyway, sorry, I've got a whole soapbox about this if you want to hear it.
Well, that's probably the reason it didn't happen in the olden days is they didn't have social media, you know, and they didn't have movements to ostracize
I mean,
people.
it wouldn't have happened 20 years ago because we wouldn't have been able to keep our society functioning because our technology was not good enough, right? Even set aside the communication aspects of social media or whatever, we just didn't have technology that was good enough. So we would have had to have dealt with it because you can't just have kids sitting on their bottoms at home like for 18 months. That's not a thing. So the Zoom and the online and stuff, like, look, it's fun. It's a blessing. I'm glad we can do this. But the downside is it allowed us to substitute or to think that we were taking care of things because we could see each other's faces across the Zoom screen. So, and really I don't think this would have happened 20 years ago.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. The technology is the reason we've been able to hide away as long as we have. Jacob, I kind of feel like you have a question.
I don't know if I have a question. I was just really taking really good notes and I'm fascinated by what you said about how technology has really affected potentially our rights and our leniency with the government telling us what to do, essentially, without getting too political, but kind of like what you're saying, like just that they are kind of testing the waters, right? It almost feels, I kind of like to often think of the analogy of like a little kid always tests the limits with a parent, right? And it kind of feels like maybe right now we're in a state where they're kind of testing the waters on us to see how far can they push us, and how far will we go until we realize, oh wait, this isn't okay. And so it's really interesting that, like you're saying, that I think technology has kind of allowed more of that leniency to happen. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Oh, sure. And I mean, to clarify, I'm not trying to be political if I'm coming off that way. I don't think we're allowed to be political here, but I'm not trying to be. And I don't think this is a Republican problem or a Democratic problem. This is a problem of humans and human nature and humans being fallible, and power corrupts, and people are ambitious and greedy. And they will, if you give them a little bit of power, they will take it 10 times further than you ever meant for them to take it. And that's why we have separation of powers and checks and balances. All of these things are checks on fallible human beings. And so to clarify, I do not, both sides of the political aisle are falling prey to this. I'm a fallible human being who got given a little bit of power, and now I'm going to test the boundaries of the Constitution. So thank you for that.
I would say that the 9th and 10th Amendment, since to close this out with the Bill of Rights, which is what we're talking about, the 9th and 10th Amendment, that the power goes back to the states, has really held up not really held up, but has held up in regard to the coronavirus. We've seen the different states put their foot down. So I guess in the 9th and 10th, I was thinking, well, it's not in the First Amendment, except speech. If I were to think about which bill of right in the 10 Bill of Rights, it would be the 8th and 9th that have really played out in the COVID crisis. Any thoughts on that?
It's interesting because it's true. What you've said is true, and it's also kind of not true. I mean, yeah, Florida and Texas are doing different things than New York and California right now. Obviously, there are, and it is interesting because you're going to have completely unmasked normal kids at school right alongside kids that are masked up 6 feet apart behind plexiglass, and we get to watch that and happen over the course of the next several months. Sorry, that alarm went off. I don't know if y'all can see it. Several months, and so we'll get to see that in real time. Now, on the other hand, it seems like there are certain kind of national processes that are just not. It's like you can't shake them. I mean, so I'm in Texas, and if I walk down the street and go into a store, there's going to be a sign that says we're following CDC guidelines. If you're and whatever it says. I mean, the CDC guidelines thing is on every. Now people are just trying to cover their bottoms and for liability purposes or whatever. But I think it's interesting how even while we say that Texas and Florida and whoever can go their own way, there's some level of the national directive that like we are afraid to push back. What I wish is, why doesn't the Florida legislature, why doesn't the Texas legislature say to their state health departments, hey, can you go check on that? Just, can you go check and see if that's right? Because, and I'm not trying to bash the CDC any more than I would bash any other human being with power. All human beings, all human institutions with power are fallible. And the CDC falls in line with that. By the way, the Texas State Health Department or the Florida State Health Department or any of them, name your human institution, they all, I would say the same thing about anybody. Okay, I'm not bashing any particular person. I'm saying that human nature is such that checks and balances are required. And so the CDC is not exempt from that. The CDC needs to have checks and balances, and that's what federalism is about. And that's why state health departments all over this country should be tasked with investigating for themselves instead of just taking for granted that the CDC is the one human institution that did not fall prey to this human characteristic, you know?
Well, that's the bureaucracy you're talking about.
It's more the bureaucracy. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we did it. I know Kathy there's a burning question or something from a guest, but I don't want to keep Ms. Ross any longer than we're supposed to.
No, we're good. We're good here. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Well, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Tara Ross.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Us. Yeah, you're terrific. And it's really, really wonderful that I think this is like your third or fourth time on the show, right? So thank you for supporting us as your very much valued time. We appreciate you very much. It was a fascinating conversation, and your insights are really, really, really thought-provoking. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. And we thank all of you for joining us. Oh, I do want to say, join us Friday. Friday, we have workshops from 10 o'clock to 3:30, 10:30 to 3:30 in 30-minute intervals with the winning students, and Kathy and I will be there. And we're reading the Constitution from 10:30 to 11:30 live. And it's really going to be fun. It's all at constitutingamerica.org. And if that's too much to remember, American Thing, it's an American thing, americanthing.org. And you can see all the different hours and schedules, 30-minute segments, and sign up for some or for all. And we would love to see you. We have many schools that are participating across the country. So it's going to be a big day. It's a lot of fun. It's really great to see kids teaching kids, and to see rising generations that love the Constitution and are willing to, and then won the contest, and they're able to teach other kids how to correlate the culture with the Constitution. It's quite insightful, and I don't really know of anyone else who does it like we do. Kathy, do you want to say anything else in closing?
Well, we want to invite everybody to join us next week at 2 o'clock with Jeffrey Skanga from the Ashbrook Center at Ashland University. We're going to be talking about the role of the judiciary, Brutus 15 and Federalist 78. So please come back next week at 2 Eastern.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great, thank you, Aubrey. Thank you, Jacob. All right. See y'all Friday.